with a better person to do this month's program than my lovely bride, Penny Proctor, who is sitting right here in the room with me. She has been an amateur genealogist for 30 years now and has done both of our family trees and has done this for a number of friends and other relatives, and just loves doing the research. Penny is a graduate of Hillsdale College in Southern Michigan, got her law degree from the University of Michigan, and worked for the same company Mr. Hoffine worked for, Ohio Health. At least that's its name now. It wasn't back when they were there originally, but as a healthcare attorney for over 30 years. And then we both retired in 11. So since then, she's been doing her thing with her sorority, Pi Beta Phi, and her other big thing is doing genealogy research. So thank you, those of you who sent in information to keep her busy. She's been really enjoying it. Thank you, Paul. I know she found out some really cool stuff about everybody, which I wondered if she would have the opportunity to do it, but she loves it. And she's got some tips tonight on how you too, if you want to do it, can get started in the world of genealogy. So I'm going to throw it over to Penny. We will switch audio here since we're in the same room, and hopefully everything will go swimmingly.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's going to take me just a second to get this up on the screen. And while I'm getting this ready, I'll just say, I love doing genealogy because I love, for my family, finding out everything that happened in the past that has helped make me the person that I became. And I love it because along the way in doing genealogy, you learn bits of history, you learn bits of geography, you learn odd little facts, fun party facts, and I'm always excited when I can learn something new. So I just want you all to understand that if I can figure out how to do this without taking any classes, anybody can figure it out. So I have an obligatory disclaimer. As I said, I'm an amateur, but I've been doing this really since genealogy came online when the internet came into being in the early 90s. This is a lot of fun. Depending on how deeply you want to go, this can become expensive, but you can also get a lot of information for free or for minimal cost. But there is a warning, this can be addictive, and once you are hooked, you will begin planning your vacations around cemeteries and local historical societies. So let's talk about what you need to get ready. Minimum necessary tools. You're going to need your beginning information, and we'll talk about that. And then you are going to need a pen and paper or some kind of electronic organizational system. When I started doing this, I did it with pen and paper, and you can see the results in this picture here. I have 2 filing cabinets that are stuffed to the gills with papers that I've accumulated. And these are all genealogical resources that I bought along the way. So what is the information that you need to begin? Well, ideally, you want to capture as much of these 3 bullet points as you can, going back as many generations as you can. So you want to get the full name, if you can, including middle name or initial, and a maiden name, a date of birth, a date of death, where born, where buried, where they lived. If you can't go back very far, don't be discouraged. It's still possible to generate a lot of information. And your sources for getting this information, to start out with, your own knowledge, your family members, talking to your aunts and uncles and cousins and parents to see what they recall. And you may have family records like a family Bible or scrapbooks that can be very, very helpful. So then we need to talk about your organizational system. You can do it, if you prefer, completely in hard copy on paper. And you can set up any organizational system that is going to work for you. If you would like to have some forms to help guide you, you can get free forms online from a place called genealogysearch.org. They offer some free forms, or you can purchase genealogy kits, and you can go online and just search genealogy forms, and a lot of options will appear. If you do that, you'll be seeing it in your Facebook feed for the next 6 months. Or if you don't want to do it on paper, you can have an electronic organizational system. There are several apps for that. The one that I use is called Family Tree Maker. I chose Family Tree Maker because it interacts with the database that I prefer, which is Ancestry.com. They can sync to one another so that you don't have to manually enter information from one to the other. You can just tell it to upload or download. I recommend that you get an electronic genealogy program of some kind if you are going to try to go back more than 4 generations. Because once you get to 4 generations, the paper becomes unwieldy and almost unmanageable. This is what an electronic organizing system looks like. This is Family Tree Maker. And I've set it up so that it's on the person who is the center of my research. It's my great-great-great-grandfather, James Proctor. So from this, when you enter the information, you can see all of his ancestors that I've managed to identify. You can see his wife. Down here are his children. And if this were live and not just a screen capture, we could click here and we could go into his children and see where his children are. This program also has the ability to store documents and photographs with the person that you want to associate them with. So everything is together in one place. Once you've identified how you're going to organize your information, you need to figure out what resources you want to access. There are some free resources online. They are becoming more limited. There are many subscription services and databases that you can access. So if you want to keep your costs low, ask yourself a few questions first. Is your research going to be focused in the United States, or do you think you're going to be looking at another country? If you're looking at another country, you probably are going to have to pay for access to a database. How much information? Some people are doing this. All they want are the basic facts: date of birth, date of death, full name. If that's fine, you probably don't need to get to a lot of databases. If you want to have a bigger picture and fill it out more, you probably will need some. How far back do you want to go? The further back you go, the more likely it is you will have to pay for one of those paid services. How much assurance of accuracy do you want? We'll be talking about how to be sure of accuracy, but unfortunately, the subscription databases have the best access to the primary source documents that can help you confirm accuracy. And then the big question, how much are you prepared to spend on this hobby? Think of all that as you're getting started. There are a number of free online searchable databases. I'm not going to walk through all of these right now. If anybody is really interested in these, let me know and I'll be happy to send you a copy of this presentation that has these links in it. Some of the best, the Ellis Island records. If you think your family came through Ellis Island in the late 1900s or early 20th century, that's a free database. You will have to register, but it's free. State archives, the material that's available will vary from state to state, but there's some great resources available there. I love legacy.com. That's a combination of free and subscription service to find obituaries. And there is a wealth of information to be found in an obituary. The one that is, I think, the granddaddy of all the free online services is called the US GenWeb Project. Back in the 90s, when the internet was new, genealogists across the country decided that genealogy should be free, and they set up this website, and we're going to take a look at it here. It's no longer as good as it was in the 90s for a number of reasons. Unfortunately, it is now filled with broken links and abandoned counties, but it still has a lot of good information. So when you go to the website, usgenweb.net, this is what the homepage looks like. This is a clickable map. So you just click on the state you're interested in. In my case, I do a lot of research in South Carolina because that's where my Proctor family comes from. So when I click on South Carolina, this is the state page. And every state page is set up a little differently, but all of them have a list of counties, both in the form of a clickable map and just an alphabetical list. So for me, what I want is Union County, South Carolina. I go to the Union County page and it looks like this. Every county is manned by a different volunteer. So every county looks different. They have different looks, they have different information available. But you can see that they have tried to add in and make accessible a lot of different information. So you have to have patience and work your way through it. You have to be prepared for some broken links and bad gateways, but what is there is good. Now, Union County does not offer a search engine to search your family name through its site, but there are a number of counties that do have that, and that makes life a lot easier. But as I said, one of the reasons that this is US Gen Web no longer has all the information that it once had is that there were people who recognized that there was money to be made in home genealogy. And so they bought up many of the sources that had previously been free and put them into subscription databases. I did a little research to find out which are considered the best and most useful, because this is far from a comprehensive list. But these are considered the top 5 in terms of usefulness if you're going to buy a subscription for the databases. Ancestry is the big one. It's got almost everything. We'll talk about what's there. Actually, Ancestry owns these other sites except for MyHeritage. MyHeritage is the only one that's completely independent of the Ancestry family. So when you go to Ancestry, we'll take a deeper look. They have some things that are always free. So you can go there without buying a subscription. You can always access the federal census from 1950, 1940, and 1880. You can also access, if you are researching an African-American family, you can access the slave schedules from 1850 and 1860 for free. Those were the only 2 decades the slave schedules were used. So a basic subscription to Ancestry will give you access to every US census that's available, Social Security death records through 2016, some military records, tax records, land records, will and probate records, other people's family trees. There's a website called Find a Grave that you can also access for free that helps you find where people are buried. And sometimes people have added pertinent information on the entry, so you can find more information there. You can find birth, marriage, and death records at Ancestry, church records, including Quaker records, and sometimes people share photographs, family photographs. So even if you have never seen a picture of your great-great-grandfather, somebody else might have put it up on Ancestry. Then Ancestry has 2 other levels above that. Each upgrade gives you access to additional databases. The most expensive gives you access to some international databases that Ancestry has purchased. So you can purchase your subscriptions monthly or annually. And all of these, I'm going to back up, all of these will try to entice you with a free trial subscription, but beware, because they will ask for your credit card up front. And if you do not cancel your free trial subscription within their stated time frame, you will be charged, and you will continue to be charged until you do cancel it on their terms. So watch out for that. Some other subscription databases that can be very useful. There's one called Fold3, that has access to American military records going back to the Revolution. And if you are wondering if your ancestor fought in the War of 1812, they may have the records to help you figure that out. There are 3 big newspaper archives that are subscription services. Newspaper articles are great because they can help corroborate something that you think you might understand about your family. Was this person really living in this location at this time? Did they die when I think they died? You can find old obituaries that can further help you identify the family. Some other things you can consider depending on how deep you want to get into it. There are books and magazines that you can purchase. This is one of the books that I purchased. This is an example of a magazine that comes out periodically and has information about a particular family. There's 2 sites where you can find yearbooks going back decades. eyearbook.com has yearbooks from high schools and colleges in all 50 states. And the availability varies for each school. In some cases, they may have only 3 yearbooks available. In others, they may have 25 to 30 yearbooks available. They're just fun to look at to find those old pictures. And classmates.com, which was originally set up to try to facilitate class reunions, actually has some yearbooks available too. And if you are a Classmates subscriber, you can get access to any high school yearbook, not just your own. So why would you want these other databases? So again, if all you want are the basics, name, dates, and locations, you probably don't need any of these. But I love the newspaper stories. They really add color to the family history. And some of the things that I've discovered through newspaper stories, Steve's great-great-grandfather once tried to shoot himself in the head 18 times, but he had loaded the wrong bullets into the pistol. And his son finally came out and took the gun out of his hand. I found out that a distant cousin of my mother won Al Capp's Sweetest Face in America contest in 1951, and she became the face of a Little Abner character named Nancy O. And I found out that 2 of my great-great-grandfathers were shooting at each other at Vicksburg, one for the Union, one for the Confederacy. And both of them survived the siege, but the Confederate died a few months later of dysentery that he contracted while at Vicksburg. Fortunately, his son, my great-great-grandfather, had been born before then. All right, now we're at step 3. We've done all the prep work. We know how we're going to organize it. We know where we're going to look. How do we get started? So you just begin with what you know and work backward. You can use the census to help you find the parents of your last known ancestor. When you're doing this, don't be afraid to play with your searches. If you don't find what you're looking for the first time, change things up. Spelling was very, very fluid in the 19th century. So look for variations in spelling. Look for differences in first name. It was also very common in the 19th century, particularly in the southern states, for men to go by their middle name rather than their first name. The census taker was not always particular about whether it was a first name or a middle name. If you can't find somebody you're looking for, try using only the last name, but a particular geographic area. If you are really certain you know when they were born, try using just the name and the year of birth without using a particular location. Make sure that when you find something, it really makes sense. Women rarely give birth at age 75. So if you've identified someone that you think is your ancestor, but she would have been 75 when she delivered her child, it's probably the wrong person. And people usually don't get married after they died. That kind of mistake usually shows up in other people's family trees. people who haven't taken the time to take that step back and make sure that this is all objectively sensible. That's why we don't take the work of other researchers as completely valid unless we can get some primary source corroboration. So while you're out there searching, what should you be looking for? The gold standard that you want is primary source documentation. And by that, we mean official documents, vital statistics, tax records, court records, church records, and family Bibles are all considered primary source and the best documentation that you can have for your family. Newspaper accounts, which is other contemporary documentation, also is extremely helpful. The most helpful documents are going to be the vital statistics, the obituaries, the census, which is not considered primary source. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Court records, military records, and immigration records. So the records that are helpful, but should not be relied upon as being 100% accurate, include federal and state census. When you're working with the census, you just have to brace yourself with the fact that there are many transcription errors. The search engines you're using are relying on transcription that was done by a computer program that tried to decipher somebody's handwriting. And sometimes you get some really funny results because of that. Then we also have spelling errors. Our census takers were not necessarily great spellers. There's a lot of things left out. People got dropped and people got overlooked. And there's often wrong information, particularly around date of birth, because in the 19th century, people weren't particularly concerned about their specific date of birth or how old they were. So they often just offered their best guess. The other thing you'll find everywhere in all of the genealogy sites are other people's family trees. And this is a good starting point, but it should never be considered a reliable endpoint because they're not always well researched. They frequently perpetuate the mistakes of others. So when you're looking at other people's family trees, look and see what documentation they have, what kind of sources have they used. And the more sources they have, the more comfortable you can feel that, yeah, there's probably accuracy there. I want to talk about the federal census. Some things to know is that large portions of the census from 1790, 1800, and 1810 were burned by the British when they sacked Washington in the War of 1812. There is still some available, but whole geographic areas have been lost. And most of the databases will try to fill those in with alternate records like tax records or land transactions. The entire 1890 census was lost to a fire. So we've got nothing from 1890. Interestingly, Ancestry uses telephone directories to help fill in for the 1890 census. From our first federal census in 1790 until 1840, the census contains information where only the head of the household is listed by name. And then within his household, others are reported only by age and gender. Then from 1850 to 1870, every person in the household who was not a slave was named. You have actual names, and they are given an age and a place of birth, but their relationship to the head of the household is not included. So you don't know if that person is a wife, a sister, a cousin, or a servant. They could be, they live in the house, but you don't know why. The slave schedules of 1850 and 1860 list only the owner's name, and then the slaves are reported by gender and age. Beginning in 1880, the census information includes the relationship of the individual to the head of the household and the birthplace of each person's parents, which is just extraordinarily helpful to know if you haven't been back further than 1880 in your research. So here's an example of what the 1830 census looks like. This is the actual census page, and I've got the arrow here. There's my great-great-great-grandfather, James Proctor. Up here, they have all of the males in the household broken down by age cohorts of 5 years each. And then here begins the females, the white females. And there's another page where the slaves are listed. Ancestry does something that's very helpful, is that they create this summary of what's on the page, because it can take a long time to work up and down to figure out who's who. So Ancestry has this nice summary that shows you that my great-great-grandfather had a young son. That's him, that's his wife, that was the whole household. So there's a lot that you can learn from the census. Before 1850, when it all looked like this, you could still learn where they lived, how old they were at the time, who is their neighbor. That can also be very helpful when you're trying to put pieces of your puzzle together, and how many people were in the household by age and gender. After 1850, you can find out where they were born, who lived with them, could they read and write, when did they arrive in the United States, were they a veteran? And then beginning in 1900, each census asked its own unique questions, like educational level, the age at your first marriage. Women were asked, how many children have they born? How many were still living? How many times have you been married? Do you rent or own? The thing to keep in mind is that the information is only as good as what the census taker understood. Here's an example of the problems caused by the understanding of the census taker. This entry actually begins up here. It's very hard to read at this point, but that is J.F. Proctor. He is my great-grandfather. Stands for Jesse Franklin. Now, in the census, they were supposed to list everybody in the household. This column was supposed to list the relationship to Jesse Franklin Proctor, the head of the household. So the first thing we have is Proctor. Is that spelled Proctor, or is that ER? It should be OR. I know it should be OR, but that transcription program that I mentioned, listed it as ER. Next, we have his wife, and then his daughter, his son-in-law. Now, Mary is listed as a daughter, but Mary, her last name is Parrish. She is actually the granddaughter of Jesse Franklin Parrish. So that entry is incorrect. Dewey was his grandson, also an incorrect entry. Another spelling problem here. This is the name Lewis. Is it L-O-U-I-S or L-E-W-I-S? It only makes a difference when you're trying to search out other records. And that's why you have to be very flexible with your spelling. The name below that, is that Glenn? Is it Olive? I happen to know it's Ola. His daughter's name was O-L-A, Ola, but that's how the census taker wrote it. And then my favorite, this listing here for Callie. See, Callie is listed as a daughter and a female. Well, Callie is actually my grandfather, John Calhoun Proctor, who was known as Callie in the family. The census taker probably heard the name Callie, made the assumption it was a girl, and just wrote down daughter. And then the last thing that's wrong with this whole entry is that this last name, Belton Millwood, is listed as being a boarder. He was actually Jesse Franklin's nephew. So lots of helpful stuff in the census, but you do have to look at it closely and figure out where the mistakes might be. Quaker records are wonderful. If you have Quakers in your family, the Quakers kept exquisite records. But the one thing you need to know about Quaker records is that they had their own calendar system. They rejected the calendar that the rest of us use because the months were named after pagan gods. So they assigned each month a number, and March is number 1. So this is a record of the death of my ancestor, Gilead Pennington. He was born on the 16th day of the 10th month of he died on the 16th day of the 10th month of 1838. The 10th month is actually December, not October. So you need to bear that in mind while you're working with Quaker records. Quick word about DNA services, because they're kind of everywhere, and most of the services like Ancestry or RootsWeb will offer them to you. DNA can be very useful for genealogy, and especially from men, because most of the tests trace the, I'm not a scientist enough to explain it, but they trace the genes that are found in men. It can help you confirm or identify relationships with other researchers. It can help you corroborate your research, but it can also lead to some very unsettling surprises when you find out that your grandfather had a whole family that you knew nothing about. You also are surrendering the information to the site. So you want to read their terms, their privacy terms carefully. They may use the information for their own research, and they may have to turn it over to law enforcement if they receive a subpoena. So if you're going to get into genealogy, some tips for success. Number one, be patient and be imaginative, because you probably are going to have to search and research and work through screen after screen of material in some cases to find what you're looking for. Then be persistent, because if you can't find it today, the databases update regularly and it may be there 6 months from now. Think laterally. If you can't find people in your direct line of heritage, look for their siblings, look for their cousins. Oftentimes, if you can find a sibling's obituary, you can get a lot of information about the person you are actually researching. You need to expect a brick wall. That is the phrase that refers to the ancestor who you just can't get past. You can't find out anything about anyone earlier than that person. The other thing to remember is that no matter how unique the name, there is likely someone else with the exact same name. So pay attention to detail. Corroboration matters. I've been working on a project for my mother's side of the family, trying to find out something about a man named Christopher Columbus Ganaway, who lived in Texas. What I found is there are 3 men named Christopher Columbus Ganaway in Texas in the same time period. So I have not sorted through those out yet, but I never imagined I would find 3 at the same time. And if you don't have primary source material, keep your research, keep it as a working hypothetical, but keep questioning your conclusions. I spent 6 months researching the family of Steve's mother. Their last name was Thompson. I finally stepped back and realized that I had made a mistake. And so now those Thompsons have become the irrelevant Thompsons in our family lore. And I had to go back and start over and find the right family line. Most of all, I hope you have fun doing it. There's so many little fun facts and learning opportunities along the way. And I do really love understanding the hardships, the adversity, the tenacity that generation after generation shows that made it possible for me to be here now today. So thank you very much. I love talking about this, so thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And well, I was just going to slide over there and share the screen with her, but I think we were playing with the audio here. So thank you, honey. Any questions, real quick questions from anybody? I think she can hear them over here.
Well, Penny, let me be the guinea pig here. I asked Penny to do a research on a great-great-grandfather, and the only information I had was from a census, I don't know what it was, 1910 or something, or where a great-grandfather had put down that his father was born in Florida. That's all I had. Do you remember the circumstances, Penny? Can you explain how you research it and what you came up with?
I do, and that one was fun because he's one of the ones who had a different first name in every census he was in. Because sometimes he went by his initials and sometimes he went by the name Elza, and sometimes the census taker heard it wrong and had him as Ezra. But as it turned out, his father was stationed at, I've forgotten the name of the fort, but a fort in Tampa, Florida, in the late 1830s, and probably was there to participate in the Seminole Wars, and left there. We didn't find his actual discharge papers. He may have left Florida unexpectedly and quickly and returned to Ohio, where he kept a low profile for a number of years. Yeah, that wasn't Elsa, was it? It was his father.
It was his father, right?
Yeah. But yeah, that was fun to put together.
So he had told everybody that his father was born in Florida, but he actually, and you also found out that my great grandfather wasn't really raised by him.
Right.
So the only thing that he knew was this man came back from Florida from the Seminole War, and he thought he was born in Florida. That's all he knew about it. So it's interesting because it just baffled me that when I looked at I believe he was born in the 1830s, Florida, and if he was Irish, that would make him what we call in Florida the crackers, which were the Irish that came in that settled in Florida.
First cowboys down there, cattle herders.
Right, exactly. They're the first cattle drive, and there's several theories of how they became named crackers, but one of them is that they cracked the whips for the cattle as they did the cattle drive across Florida. So the very first cattle drive was done in Florida, was not done in Texas.
Yeah. Well, it's just been astonishing what she's been able to find over the years. Like the thing about my great-great-grandfather, who was a Civil War veteran. And I knew that he had ended his life in the first Soldiers and Sailors retirement home up in Sandusky, Ohio. I knew that from family lore, but I never knew why. But evidently, from what she was able to find through newspaper articles, he must have been suffering what we now think of as PTSD after the war. And the thing she found was that in the Plymouth, Ohio newspaper, he had tried to shoot himself 16 times, kept reloading with rimfire cartridges where it needed to be a center punch cartridge, and finally decided, well, that must say something. Says that I'm from a long line of idiots, probably. But anyway, that's what sent him off to the Soldiers and Sailors home. And I had never known until she found that why he'd left the family and moved there to end his last 10 years there in the Soldier and Sailors home. It's been astonishing the things she's been able to find. Well, we've had 5 people that have sent Penny information on their immediate ancestors, and she's tried to do some research on them. If any of you would still like to do it, she would be very happy to.
Oh, yes.
She loves doing it, I think you figured out.
Yes, I really would.
So what we did, just to do a thing for raising money for polio, since October is polio month on the Rotary calendar, was you donate something to polio through the Rotary website, send us the receipt, Penny will do the research, whatever she can find. And, the offer is still open. If you don't have my earlier email, I'll be glad to send another one out to you to get the information. But it's amazing what can be found out there now. And she's got a vast trove of information. Anybody else got any questions or anything on that, Scott?
Yeah, thanks very much. I just, I am on ancestry.com and going back, but I just had a quick question. It seems to me people had different ideas about family back in even just a couple of generations ago, where like someone's who they thought was their mother was actually maybe a second wife, or it didn't seem, I don't know what your thoughts are, but it didn't seem people were as strict as we are about whose step and this kind of, the relationships were more, I don't know, not so
Well,
strict. What do you think?
no, I think that that's true, and I have fallen into that trap a couple of times. Looking at somebody, like, I have an ancestor who was born in, say, 1830, but the person identified as his mother, the marriage record shows they got married in 1835, so she probably was not his mother. There was probably an unknown first wife, and somehow that's how you figured it out. They were not, particularly in the 1800s, they were not particularly concerned about designating somebody as a step.
Yeah. And it didn't seem they were that concerned about letting the children know that actually this is not your real mother, maybe?
Yeah, no, you never know what the family dynamic is, but if the first wife died and the children were quite young, they may never have known anybody else.
Yeah. Okay. So that was rather common, you think?
Yeah,
Or it did occur.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else with a question or anything she can address here? Well, thank you, honey.
Thank you all. I'll go back over to my coin.
Thank
I
you.
thought it was amazing. I thought she did a really good job. It was so clear, and I'm not really interested in pursuing details like that because I don't trust myself to find like reliable information because I'm kind of gullible maybe. So I want her to do my dad's family because my great aunt on my mom's side did a really thorough investigation of that side, but my dad's side is really, he has no idea about his grandfather even, which I think is pretty amazing. My dad's older, he's almost 90, but we're very rural people, and he has no idea, and all of his sisters also have no idea. They know nothing. So we tried to find, we used that find grave. Is that what you said it was?
Yeah.
We've tried that, and it actually guided us to a cemetery, looked everywhere, but there's no trace of markers even in that side of the cemetery because it's so old, like all the markers are gone. So we kind of just quit because we have no idea what we're doing, but I would like your help.
Well, yeah, thumbs up over there. Well, it's the thing too of once you get into this, like she said, we have probably taken, oh geez, at least a dozen different trips around the country, either going to genealogical research libraries or courthouses or looking at graves and stuff. We were in Arlington, Virginia, looking for a relative of hers that was pre-Civil War era living in Arlington. And she had names and dates and everything. And one of the more astonishing things that I've had happen is she gets out trying to look at a certain portion of the cemetery that seemed to be that era. Somehow I got out of the car, walked about 10 steps and walked right up to it and said, "It's here." And I have no idea what kind of psychic thing sent me that message. It wasn't my ancestor speaking to me, but I've done that about 4 times when we've been looking for her ancestors in graveyards, walking right up to their headstones. Sue?
Well, tell me when you have time to come to Pennsylvania. You can, I'll flop you down to the right cemetery.
A question in regards to the graveyards how do you find out if you know the graveyard, who's got the records of where people are?
You unmute.
No, I'll just come over.
Okay.
Okay. Usually that is in the possession of the caretaker of the cemetery. So a lot of these old cemeteries, the really old ones, are now maintained by, say, township trustees. Some of them may be private and have a private caretaker, but they usually have a list of names and sometimes an approximate location. Even if there's no stones, they have a record of kind of about where the bodies were buried. Now, finding the caretaker, you're not going to find the caretaker on Find a Grave. That's going to require some extra research.
Right, you'd have to write to somebody, some county office or something and find out, okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Township or church, or you just never know. The
right,
most remarkable ones was on my side of the family, my mother's side. They were Quakers that came out of North Carolina to Wilmington, Ohio, and settled there. And I had a great-great-grandfather who, although he was Quaker, fought for the Union Army in the Civil War. And we were down there looking for information on him. I took my mom and dad out to see his gravestone that we had found. And while I was doing that, Penny was in the genealogical library there doing research. And she found out that my mother's aunt, who my mom had not seen since 1942 and had been estranged from the family, was still alive and living in a nursing home about 10 miles away, which totally freaked my mother out. And my mom just couldn't bring herself to just drop in on this lady in her late 80s. So she wrote to her, and tragically, she died about 3 weeks after my mom wrote to her, but we got confirmation that she at least had gotten the letter. And I'll never know the story of how she got estranged from the other members of the family, but that was just wow, a wow moment. Any other points or questions or anything from anybody? Okay, then. Well, back to our fine organization. Like I said,